Thank you so much for joining us this morning for Face the State. Happy New Year. I'm TRACY Townsend. As we start 2022, we want to take some time to reflect on the year that was 2021. It was another year in the COVID-19 pandemic. There was a major emphasis nationwide and here at home in Ohio on vaccination. Reporter Kevin Lander sat down one-on-one with Governor Mike DeWine to get his thoughts on 2021.
State lawmakers tied your hands back in March when it gave them approval power over health orders. It looked like you retreated and caved to preserve your party's peace. What's your take on that?
Well, that's absolutely not true. I've had one focus since this pandemic began, and that's on saving lives and saving people's livelihoods so they could work. I think Ohio has had a very good balance. We've done it the Ohio way. We haven't done it the way some other states have done it. Some states have, shut everything down. I think we had a very consistent policy, and what someone says as they criticize me or that does not impact what I'm going to do. I do believe that people, once the vaccines were available, I think everyone's attitude across this country, governors, president, everyone, it shifted because the facts had shifted. We now had the ability, people had the ability to protect themselves. But, my plea is the same. If you have not been vaccinated, this is how you keep your kids in school. This is how you save lives. If you haven't had the booster shot, please get the booster shot. It's very, very, very powerful as well.
Which administration do you think has handled it the best?
President Trump was in office at a very different time than President Biden. Each one has faced a different circumstance. I think when you look at what the Trump administration did, they get a lot of credit for making the moves very early on in this pandemic so that we would have the vaccine. We have a good relationship with both of those administrations in regard to the COVID. They both were focused on let's deal with the COVID. So, I think it's important for the governor of the state to work very closely with the President of the United States, no matter who the President of the United States is, on a national crisis such as this. Look, we may disagree about policy issues, but saving lives and keeping people working and protecting their livelihoods, these are all common goals. And so we're going to work with who's ever in the White House on these specific goals.
We mentioned about the health orders being taken away. Do you think that weakened you as a governor? Do you think that puts Ohioans' health at risk by not giving you the ability to do those orders that you used to be able to do before the legislature stepped in?
Well, I expressed my opinion and my position very, very clearly to the legislature. On one occasion, they overrode my veto. We have to respect what our Constitution says. They overrode the veto. But that never stopped me from pushing as hard as I could every single day to work to keep Ohioans working, but also to keep Ohioans protected. One of the things that we're looking at right now is we get ready for Christmas. Everyone wants to be tested, and that's very, very understandable. I want to thank our libraries. They stepped up. We asked the libraries a number of months ago, will you distribute these tests? Now, that's not something libraries usually do, but they did it. And so when people call the library, and if the library's out, don't blame the library. They have done a very, very good job in this. If you look back, Kevin, we bought millions of these tests, and we bought them early enough so that we would have them. As of today, I think we've put out about 5 million of these tests free around the state. If you just look in December, I think we've had over 1 million that we put out. And in Franklin County alone, I think it's been about 110,000. So there's a great appetite out there for these tests. We're not totally satisfying that, but we're going to continue to put these out as fast as we can.
When you look at Omicron, you probably never thought we'd be at this point today, having lived through what we did last year. How concerned are you about this virus spreading into next year and what life will look like next year if we don't get a handle on vaccinations and people getting boosters?
Well, I'm very concerned about it. I think anyone looking at what's going on has to be concerned. Our hospitals filled up in Ohio, and the threat that that poses to every person, whether they're vaccinated or not vaccinated. You could be in there tomorrow, I could be in there tomorrow, a loved one of ours could be in for an auto accident or a heart attack or some other problem. So having our hospitals filled and having our nurses and doctors worn out, yes, that certainly worries me. We do have a remedy. And I think part of my job is to continue to point out what that remedy is. You know, some people have talked about miracles. What has happened in regard to the vaccine and the fact that it was developed that fast, and the fact that it is, once you get that vaccine, you are almost guaranteed that you're not going to be into a hospital, and almost guaranteed you're not going to die from this, is frankly a miracle. We need to take advantage of what has been presented to us by the scientists and use it.
Do you need to do something differently? Do you need to pivot in any way to try to turn around what's happening, considering we just had the highest number of cases ever?
What we're seeing in Ohio, we're seeing across the country. And that is generally that our more rural areas are less vaccinated. We've looked at every kind of messaging we can do. I still believe that the best message comes from your own personal doctor. And what I tell people is, you don't have to listen to Mike DeWine. Listen to your doctor. Go talk to your doctor. And that doctor can tell you the pros and cons of doing this. And I think that, you know, doctors will tell their patients that they're much better off getting the vaccine than not getting the vaccine. So that's what I do. I tell people, go talk to your own individual doctor.
Ohio lawmakers took up several controversial bills in 2021, including gun control measures and an anti-abortion bill. Here's what the governor had to say about that part of the year.
What are your thoughts on anyone over the age of 21 to carry a concealed gun or other weapon without a license in Ohio?
Yeah, I'm going to look at the bill. I've not made a position because I have not seen what the final version of that bill is going to be, and I'm going to pass on that one today.
Why do you think that's a bill that's important for Ohioans?
Well, under our Constitution, any bill that's passed by the legislature has to be looked at by the governor, and the governor has to make a decision. Is he or she going to sign the bill or veto the bill or let it become law? So this bill is no different than any other bill in regard to what my constitutional obligation is.
Do you feel a concern that having more people with weapons would increase the ability for people to commit more crime?
Well, I think we have some very specific things we have already done in regard to the crime problem. There are more things that can be done. One of the things that can be done is for the legislature to pass a bill that I have presented to them, which would focus on repeat violent offenders. The facts are very clear that 3 or 4% of the criminals, people who commit felonies, it's a very small number of them who are the violent offenders, but they're generally repeat offenders. So we have to go after them. We need some help from the legislature in regard to that bill. The other thing that we have done, I've asked the legislature to pass $250 million to go out to our local police departments. They passed it very quickly, and that money will be starting to go out to our local police departments in the next several months.
You signed an abortion bill with no exceptions for rape or incest. I'm wondering if that gave you any pause. People will say that it's just re-victimizing women again who are victims of crime and then have to deliver a child. I'd like to know your thoughts about that.
I'm pro-life. I think one of the essential functions of government is to protect the most vulnerable members of society. The unborn certainly come into that category. So I signed the heartbeat bill, and I'm very, I told everyone that I was going to do that before the election. The legislature sent the bill to me, and I signed it. Should not have been a surprise to anyone. It's an essential function of government to protect the most vulnerable.
Did it ever give you pause about not having exceptions to that?
I thought the bill was a good bill, and I signed it.
Congressional redistricting maps that you signed into law raises questions about whether you're really interested in what's better for the greater good of Ohio, or just your party maintaining political control. As governor, what makes sense about these maps to you?
Well, in regard to the state legislative act maps and in regard to the congressional maps, if you look at what was presented and you look at what the Constitution required, the maps that were presented by Republicans better complied with the Constitution. Things such as, cutting down on the number of counties that are split up and other things in there. So if you look at that, that's why, I signed the bill, for example, in regard to the congressional seats. But ultimately, this is pending before the Supreme Court, and I think we should just wait. Let's see what the Ohio Supreme Court says in regard to both the congressional district maps that have been presented as well as the state legislature. We'll follow whatever the court tells us to do. That's the way our system works.
Up next, the governor talks about his biggest accomplishment in 2021, and we also ask for his thoughts on his biggest regret. And we're back with more of our one-on-one interview with Governor Mike DeWine. 10 TV's Kevin Landers asked him to name his biggest accomplishments and regrets for 2021.
I'd like for you to reflect back on this year. What do you see as your greatest personal accomplishment, and what do you see as your biggest regret this year as governor?
Well, since I became governor, we've had one overriding goal, and that is to do everything that we can to make sure every single Ohioan has the opportunity to live up to their God-given potential. So we've done more things than have ever been done, more focus on early childhood education. Fran has the Imagination Library, the Dolly Parton Imagination Library, which is a free book to every child 0 to 5. We're now up to about 43% of the kids in the state who are getting that. We're doing much more with pregnant mothers who are in difficult circumstances because of poverty or any other reason, because we want that child to be a regular birth rate baby, weight baby. We're doing more in regard to continuing education for someone who's 30, 40, 50 years old who might be working in a factory. So the education written very, very large, I think, is the most important thing that we can focus on. And so in spite of the pandemic, in spite of all the headlines about what was going on with the pandemic, that work continued, and that work will continue.
What do you see as your biggest regret?
We all make mistakes, and I'm sure during my 3 years in office, I've made mistakes. If you look at the pandemic, what we've tried to do is take the facts that we knew at the time, the best medical advice. We've rolled into that, bringing in people from the business community to help us early on, for example, come up with how businesses were going to reopen, how they were going to operate during the virus being here during the pandemic. So we've done the best we can based upon the facts that we knew at the time. So I'll leave it to others to list Mike DeWine's failures, and as we come into a campaign, I'm sure that our opponents will be out there talking about what they think our failures were.
Do you think some of the regret is closing businesses perhaps too early?
No, I think if you look at Ohio compared to other states, what you'll find is that we did it really the Ohio way. We had a balance. Something I'm very proud of is that when we made decisions about how businesses were going to open up, in every business sector, we didn't just listen to health people. We also brought in business people and created committees, come up with the best protocol. Because we did that, the truth is that for most employees, the 8 hours or 9 hours that they were at work during the day was the safest time that they had. we were seeing very little spread directly in the workplace. And I think that's a tribute to the groups that we put together, the businessmen and women who helped us design for every single type of business, the best protocols.
Still like the job?
Well, if you like making decisions and if you like being in the middle of everything, yeah, being governor is a pretty good job. But look, seriously, I ran for governor because I wanted to do things. I wanted to focus on things. I wanted to focus on the most vulnerable. I wanted to focus on the education for our kids. I wanted to make sure that everybody in Ohio, as they're growing up, no matter whether they live in an inner city, whether they live in Appalachia, or whether they live in the suburbs, has the ability an opportunity to live their version of the American dream. And we don't win every day. We don't get everybody to do that every day, but that remains our focus. And that's what makes the job for me, so very, very exciting, because every day we can make some progress on that.
Up next, we will look ahead to what's in store for Ohio in 2022. You'll hear from both sides of the aisle on the big races coming up and the hot button issues expected to make some waves in the United States. Welcome back. We want to now focus on 2022. Several big changes are on the horizon for Ohio, including a change in representation of our state on the national level and the possibility of a leadership change on the state level. We have perspective from both sides of the aisle on what's in store for this year from our conversation with Herb Asher, Professor Emeritus of the Ohio State University Department of Political Science, and Republican strategist TRACY. We start with a couple of big races.
Who do you think is going to get Senator Portman's seat?
Well, as dirty and nasty as it's been, and as ugly as it's going to get, even more so, somebody's bound to win, either a Democrat or Republican. And the Republicans have got the bloodier and nastier primary. And again, it's going to get worse and worse. One candidate, Josh Mandel, has an initial advantage of name ID, but you've got 4 or 5 of the candidates literally with millions of dollars. And that's why I say there's going to be a lot of sharp elbows and a lot of nasty words. And if you think you've seen a lot on TV so far, wait till January, February, March, and April.
I think the conventional wisdom would be that the Republican who wins the primary will be the favorite in the general election, in part because a lot of people are saying that 2022 is going to be a bad year for Democrats in general. But if the party goes too far to the right, if they nominate a candidate who, in order to win the primary, has had to take some really strange and wacko positions, maybe that gives the Democrats an opportunity. On the Democratic side, it'll be Tim Ryan as the nominee, and Tim Ryan comes probably the closest in terms of being, sort of a traditional liberal Democrat, moderate liberal Democrat, comes closest to the profile of a Sherrod Brown. Tim Ryan would never be classified as one of those far out lefty progressive Democrats. So he might be a strong candidate, but he'll partly be at the mercy of what are the prevailing economic tones. Is inflation still bad? Is everybody mad at Joe Biden? And if that's the case, then that hurts Democrats down ballot.
The other race we will be following closely is for Ohio governor. For the Democrats, former Dayton Mayor Nan Whaley is running against Cincinnati's former mayor John Cranley for the nomination. On the Republican side, Governor DeWine is running for re-election as well as Joe Blystone, a farmer from East Liverpool, and former U.S. Representative Jim Renacci. So who will win?
Probably on the Democrat side, they've got a heated race, but I think Dayton's Nan Whaley will probably win. One of the key questions is going to be both of the 2 Democrat candidates have to get a running mate. And if they're like Renacci, where you come up with a running mate of nobody from nowhere, that kind of says, how are you really a viable candidate if you don't have somebody legitimate and with some name ID in some part of the state and a record to run on? But I think it'll probably be Nan Whaley versus Mike DeWine, and Mike DeWine in terms of name ID and the record, and he's going to have the campaign money. And if you look at the polling data in the fall, Mike DeWine gets pretty high marks from not all Republicans, but most Republicans, but especially among independents and Democrats. He does very well, much better than your average Republican.
And if it is DeWine versus Whaley, DeWine will certainly be the favorite as the incumbent in an election year in a state like Ohio, where the Republicans, have about a 4 or 5 point advantage just starting off. But I think Democrats are also hoping that the scandals associated with First Energy, Larry Householder, House Bill 6, that all of these, that more will continue to come out, and that will give them an opportunity to run on the issue of corruption.
There's a lot of anticipation in 2022 surrounding the U.S. Supreme Court ruling on the Mississippi law banning abortions at 15 weeks. So we asked, how will the court rule?
There's going to be a decision. Abortion will still be legal in certain parts of America. I think the big question is, what is the timing of when do they say viability? Because as you look at the original Roe decision of 73, you look at the later Casey decision, no connection to me, it basically moved to the question of viability. And the good news is medically, babies or unborn can be kept alive at a younger age in terms of the process compared to the normal 9 months. So I think there'll be a decision. It'll be much debated, but it won't abolish abortion totally. It won't say business as usual, but it's going to tighten it down, and you're going to see more differences of what states do to limit later term abortions, what's allowed, what's not allowed.
It does sound like from the questioning that they're going to approve Mississippi's 15-week, and then the question becomes, how do they frame that? Do they now give a very narrow, that 15-week limitations are constitutional, but what does that mean about 14, 13, 12? Well, yeah. Will the court want to be constantly addressing the next effort to weaken abortion rights? I'm not sure they do. I think they don't. This doesn't do great benefit for their reputation, but I think they'll support the Mississippi law if they approve it. That doesn't end Roe versus Wade. Now, if in fact they were to say we're approving the Mississippi law, and more broadly, we're saying that Roe versus Wade really doesn't have standing anymore, that's a different story.
And we thank you all for joining us today. We wish you a happy new year. Remember, if it affects you, your family, and Ohio, we're here to make sure those accountable face the state.